How's everyone doing tonight? Really? Come on, we can do better than that. How's everyone doing tonight? We doing all right? All right. Way to go, Howard County. All right, so hi, my name is Steve Brigham. I'm with Public Engagement Associates. We've been working with Howard County over the last couple of months to help them with a lot of the public engagement they've been doing as part of the recovery process. This is the second major meeting that we've had. We had one back on October 18th. So we're delighted that you're here. It's great to see a full room. We're going to jump right into it. Unfortunately, the county executive, Alan Kittleman, was not able to be here. He's got competing priorities, but he wanted to make sure that he was still in the room, so we've got a short video message from him that we're going to see right now.
Hi, and thank you for taking time to attend this important meeting. Tonight is the first of 3 community meetings planned for residents and stakeholders from the greater Ellicott City area. The purpose of these meetings is to begin to form a planning vision for the entire Ellicott City watershed area with a focus on rebuilding together, stronger, and more resilient. Each meeting will have a specific theme, guest speaker, and community dialogue, and you'll have the opportunity to share your ideas. Tonight has an emphasis on rebuilding and the environment. In a few minutes, you'll hear a presentation from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. You'll learn about how Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and the state of Vermont planned for flood mitigation, how they implemented successful green infrastructure, and how they planned for flood recovery and long-term resilience. At the next meeting on December 1st, the focus will be on rebuilding and economic development, with a presentation by the City of Frederick. And then, at the third meeting on December 10th, the topic will be rebuilding and historic preservation, with a presentation by the City of Annapolis. We have always been firm in our commitment to rebuild Ellicott City, but we don't want to rebuild it the same way. We want to rebuild it to be stronger and better. We want it to be a model resilient community for the state and for the nation. I hope you will continue to support the restaurants and merchants of the historic district, especially during the holiday shopping season. Thanks for being here, and thanks for your commitment to stand EC Strong.
Great, and thank you. And I know all of you know that the county executive is passionately committed to this process, and he will be with us in the other 2 meetings that we do in December. Right now, I would also like to bring up County Councilman John Weinstein, who really needs no introduction. You know him well. Also to offer his welcome.
Thank you very much. I'll be real brief. Thank you very much for being here tonight. The simple point is that you are going to make a difference in the future of Ellicott City, and for that, I'm grateful. I know the county government, a lot of representatives here who are helping facilitate this session. I thank them, and I think you should too when you get the opportunity, for giving their time, energy, and attention to making sure we do all that we can to recover and become a more resilient and even a better place, even though it was pretty perfect in my book, but a better place than before the storm. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, John. So we're going to move right into this. So I want to first start with some comments just to give you some orientation to the night and where it fits into this process. So the focus for tonight is to focus on 2 areas of rebuilding. As the county executive mentioned in his video, we're focused on a number of different pillars across this process. Tonight, it's mainly focusing on rebuilding and the environment and around the long-term flood recovery process. We're going to get a chance to hear more about the project idea generation and compilation process that has been happening, and that you'll get a chance to add your own ideas into the mix for the long-term recovery. We're also very fortunate to have a presentation from a senior person from the Environmental Protection Agency who will talk about experiences in other communities in Vermont and in Iowa that might be translatable to what we might want to do here in the recovery process. So we've got a very full set of things we're trying to focus on tonight. In terms of the specific process we're going to use, how many people were here last meeting, October 18th? All right, so just a handful. So this is a very engaging and dynamic process. You're all seated at round tables for a reason. We're going to have you engage in several different discussions, a couple of them in depth over the course of the evening. We are fortunate to have a number of people who are Howard County staff who volunteered their time tonight to serve as neutral facilitators at the table to make sure you have a constructive discussion. Can I just have them raise their hands and thank them in advance for doing this work on our behalf tonight? We're going to be generating ideas at the table through use of worksheets and primarily Post-it notes. And we have a team in the room that will be collecting the Post-it notes after each discussion is over and trying to quickly summarize either examples or recurring ideas that we can report back to you during the meeting. So that's what we call fast cycle feedback. We also have some technology at the table. We have keypads that are in these bags. These are wireless polling keypads. You may have used them before in your business or in other meetings you've done. But we're going to ask you some polling questions, and you get instantaneous responses of the whole group so you can see where the whole group stands on various different questions and statements. So in terms of the agenda for tonight, so you can see there's a number of things we're doing. So there will be a formal table introduction process that we do right after my opening, and we will also do some opening polling so we get an understanding of who's in the room and what some of your perspectives are. Then we'll move directly into a presentation from the Environmental Protection Agency, mainly focused on flood and flood resilience and kind of checklists to think about during the recovery process and preparing for future events. And then you'll engage in a table discussion where you'll identify ideas that you think are compelling and applicable from what you heard in the presentation to what Ellicott City might be thinking about going forward. Then we'll hear from Joe Herr, who's the recovery manager. He'll talk about all of the ideas that we have been collecting already from community leaders and community members in previous meetings. Kind of let you know how that compilation process has gone, describe some of the construction projects that are underway, and also give you an opportunity to share your own ideas of what you want to see in the recovery process. Then we'll move into a table discussion where we've begun to identify some categories and themes of project ideas that have already been generated. We want you to take a look at it, see if these make sense, see if you think there are any critical themes that are missing, and then we'll ask you to actually propose specific ideas that you think should be part of the recovery process. And then at the very end of the night, we'll hear back from a group that we're calling the theme team that's going to be looking at the Post-its after each discussion and creating PowerPoint slides or handing me Post-it notes so I can share a sampling of what you've talked about at the tables. Then we'll do some final polling, and you'll hear about what to expect next in terms of meetings and other processes that are underway. So as you can see, it's a very full evening. Next slide. So where does tonight fit into the overall process that we've been doing? So as you can see, through October, we met with about a half a dozen different groups. We already have, I think, collected close to 250 project ideas. We've begun to categorize and theme those, but we're still over the next month going to be collecting many more. So that's part of what this process is that will continue into at least mid-December. Then after the new year, we will really begin looking at what do we need to prioritize out of those lists that have a shorter term time frame that don't belong in a master plan process, that we might begin identifying specific things that could happen next year, match those with resources, etc. So that will happen in the first part of 2017. And by spring of 2017, the county will embark on a master watershed and master area plan for the watershed area, and we'll be using all of the ideas that were generated this fall and figuring out what are the types of ideas that really belong in a master plan process. So all of that will happen after Christmas, after New Year's, really figuring out what's shorter term, doesn't belong in master plan, what's longer term, and will belong in that longer process that will occur for the better part of 2017. Also underway right now are a number of studies that you may have heard about. Let me just get out my notes here. So there's a flood case study where There's a group that's collecting firsthand accounts of what happened on July 30th and map how the water reacted in Ellicott City during the flooding. That's due to be completed sometime probably early December. The Tiber-Hudson Corridor Stream Corridor Assessment, this is happening right now. It will analyze the current state of the stream channels and provide recommendations on potential enhancements. That also is due to be completed by early December or so. Then there's a hydrologic and hydraulic study that will be a comprehensive analysis of the Hudson, the Tiber, the New Cut branches, all the way down to the Patapsco. It will model how certain water retention controls and channel enhancements will reduce the amount of flooding on Main Street in various storm conditions. That's not due to be completed until mid-spring, early to mid-spring. So all of these are really important, as well as the engagement. It's all kind of happening in parallel. And all of these will feed into the master plan process, and like I said, which will begin in sometime in the spring of 2017. So that's kind of in a nutshell where tonight fits into this overall scheme and what other things are happening in parallel that are going to be critical to the long-term flood recovery process. All right, so next slide. All right, so we're going to move into the first table discussion. I want to quickly just acknowledge a couple of people. So we do have Senator Roby here. Senator, if you could just raise your hand. We want to thank him again. He's leading the Community Advisory Group over the last 3 months. Do we have any Community Advisory Group members in the room? We've got a half a dozen. Great. Thank you for your service so far. These folks are meeting every week, every Thursday, and they've been doing that since, I think, Labor Day, right? That's about right? A while, right. And they will continue to meet for a while. So they've been doing great work, getting up to speed in really great ways to try and understand what's going on and making sure that the community is directly involved in this process on a weekly and daily basis. We also have Naja Bailey from Councilman Ball's office with us. And we have several representatives from Maryland State Government. So I want to thank all of you and welcome all of you for participating tonight. So on to the first table discussion, which is a very simple discussion. You probably have already met a lot of the people at your table somewhat informally, but we're going to ask you to go through a formal process where you need to answer just 3 questions. What is your name? Where do you live? And I know most people placed a sticky dot on a big watershed map out in the main hall. That's a map that we're going to be using at all of our public meetings so we understand all the people participated, where they are in relationship to the watershed. And the third and probably most critical question is, what do you love most about Ellicott City? We had a great conversation about this a few weeks ago at the first meeting we did on October 18th. And so to get us started on this, I'm going to ask everyone to take 60 seconds silently at the table, grab a square Post-it note off the Post-it pad, and just write down one thing that you really love about Ellicott City. And then once your table is done doing that, your facilitator can open up the discussion and you can go around the table introducing yourselves. You'll have about 7 or 8 minutes for this. So your facilitators now should have a worksheet with all your Post-its. So we're going to send the theme team around to collect them, and they will look through them and give me a number of examples from across the tables that I can share in a few moments. While they're doing that, I'd ask you to pull out your polling keypad. So facilitators, if you haven't distributed them yet, please take them out. Each participant should get one. All right, So these are very easy to use. I want to make sure I've got everyone's attention though. So I want to make sure everyone votes. So we're going to ask a series of questions. Each question or statement will have a number of options. After I ask it, you press the number on the keypad corresponding to the option that you prefer. A green light will light up that indicates that the system has received your vote. If it doesn't light up, let us know. We can check it. If it's not working, we can give you a new keypad. If you happen to make a mistake, you wanted to press 3, but somehow you pressed 6, you press 3 before the vote is closed, the system takes your last vote. So it's very forgiving. We're going to have a number of questions where it's multiple choice or press all that apply. So you just press, like let's say there's 6 options and 3 of them apply to you. You press 1, you press 4, you press 5, but just make sure you get a green light before you press your second one. All right? And we'll go slow the first couple times so that you have plenty of time to make sure you get up to speed. So let's see the first question. All right, so the first question is, what is your relationship to Ellicott City? This is one of those where press all that apply. So you press 1, I live there, 2, I work there, 3, I own a business there, 4, I shop there, 5, I worship there, 6, I own property there, 7, it's something that we didn't come up with, and we'll find out what that is. Again, press all that apply. It might be all 6 of them, might be all 7 of them, but press all those that apply to you. And so everyone got it? Anyone still voting? All right, let's close voting. Kim already did. Thank you, Kim. All right, so more than 3/4 of us shop there. That's the highest vote getter. Half of the 100%, 52% live there. So we have a lot of Ellicott City people in the room. 20% work. 43% own property there. 20% other. What are some of the other relationships you have? Just call them out.
Volunteering.
Volunteering. What else?
I grew up here, my family lives here, and they own a business here.
All right, so lots of different relationships. Great to see. It looks like there's a lot of people in here that have multiple relationships, which is great because those are the kind of relationships we need to rebuild and recover in the right ways. Second question. Do you have an Ellicott City address? Press 1 for yes, press 2 for no. And you even get music for your listening pleasure. Smooth jazz. Right, dance floor. Here you go. Is one of them not working? It's like a wedding dance here. All right, so let's see the answers here. All right, so 3/4 of the folks in the room have an Ellicott City address. So Ellicott City has shown up in the room, in the house. All right, next question. How long have you lived, worked, or regularly visited, which includes shop, dined, worshipped in Ellicott City? Press 1 if I don't live, work, or regularly visit. And then there's 4 different ones for periods of time that you have that kind of relationship. So we're trying to get a sense of duration here in terms of your relationship to Ellicott City. Guitar recital music, I think. All right. Anyone need more time? All right, so half the room has more than 20 years. That's great. We have a small percentage that press number 1, and then we've got a nice distribution of people of varying periods of time in terms of their participation and engagement with Ellicott City. And again, it's really important that we have people who've been here a long time and people who are new to Ellicott City all have an important interest in making sure that we rebuild. Next question. How often do you visit Old Ellicott City? So one, on a daily basis because I live or work there, and then visit weekly, 2 or 3 times a month, every few months, a couple times a year, or rarely. Yes, the answer that best fits you. So it may not be perfect, but try to pick one. All right, anyone still need time? All right, let's see the results. All right, so half, and I think we saw that in a previous slide. About a quarter of you on top of that visit weekly, so 75% have a very regular relationship. And then again, it's a distribution of people who are in Ellicott City a little less frequently. Great, that's helpful to know. How important is it to you to rebuild Old Ellicott City on a scale of 1 to 4, from very important to not at all important? All right, anyone still voting? All right, let's see the results. All right, so 91%, very important. Not a total surprise given who's in the audience, right? 5% moderately important, 5% slightly important. So there's a range there, but the vast majority in the room deem it as very important. Again, helpful to know for tonight. So now I get a chance to see some of the examples from your tables on what you love about Ellicott City. It's a good thing I've got my progressive lenses on tonight. All right, so Ellicott City brings together restaurants, shops, services, etc. in a relatively small, picturesque area on a human scale. Another one, the people that make up the vibrant community. That's something we heard a lot last time, the people. The history, the uniqueness, it's not cookie cutter. It's so important to keep the historic area for generations to come. The charm, the narrow stairs and stones up between buildings. The amenities of a city neighborhood wrapped in nature. Where history and nature and the environment meet, which is a good theme for tonight. Midnight Madness and the beauty of the Patapsco. And then finally, historic buildings and unique shops. So this is probably at least one post-it note from every table, but does that sound like the kinds of things that you heard at your table? Great, so thank you for participating in this. 3 weeks ago we did this, we collected another 75 post-it notes. We did a word cloud that you can see over there on that back board. We're going to continue to do this at all the meetings and see how that heart cloud, as it were, evolves. And we're really wanting people to get in touch with why this place is so important and why it's important to rebuild it in the right way. So thank you for those. All right. Then, without further ado, we are actually going to get into the meat of the matter tonight. Again, we said the theme tonight is rebuilding in the environment, and we are really, really grateful tonight that we have Mr. Kevin Nelson, who is the Senior Policy Analyst from the US EPA, Office of Sustainable Communities, and he's a neighbor of ours because he lives in Catonsville. So please welcome Kevin.
Thank you very much, Steve. As was mentioned, I live in Catonsville, have lived there for over 10 years, frequent Ellicott City quite a bit, and as I've told a couple of people already, I on July 30th, about 7:30 that evening, drove through Main Street. So I really kind of had that on my mind as I was preparing for this discussion. So what I was asked to do to come into this discussion is provide sort of a big picture perspective. Everyone here knows what happened locally, but the office that I work for at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, my office is down in Washington, D.C. I work at the headquarters office there. What we do in that Office of Sustainable Communities is we focus on land use and providing options for local governments, for communities, and for regions of the country to grow and develop in ways that protect land and protect the environment. And so what I'm going to talk about today are mainly two examples of ways that our office has engaged with communities to address disasters. Specifically, going back to 2009, I'll talk a little bit about our engagement with some cities in Iowa that had been impacted when the Cedar River flooded there back 7 years ago. And then I'll talk more comprehensively about a more recent flood that was in the state of Vermont, and some work that our office did to work with communities there to develop tools and resources so that they could get back on their feet, but also provide best practices for other cities around the country. So with that, I'll talk about those two broad examples, and then towards the end, talk more specifically about some other resources that our office at EPA and offices around our agency have developed dealing with flood mitigation, dealing with stormwater management, dealing with how to think about those land uses and the development regulations that can be changed so that communities either are safe from flooding, or if they're more susceptible to flooding, how they can protect themselves so that when flooding occurs again, and in many cases around the country, places that are in those high-risk floodplains, as we know here, over the course of time, flooding has a propensity to continue happening. So what I'll talk specifically about is, as I mentioned just briefly, about 7 years ago, myself and about 4 other people in my office, we went out to communities in Iowa as the Cedar River had flooded, crested, flooded a variety of different places. And what we did there was, that was our first entree into thinking about what can communities do to address these issues. And so what we did, and this is why I wanted to start there, is sort of my office's first way of thinking about what were things that we could do to change, or what were ways that we could rethink the planning process, rethink the development process. And specifically with that, I was in the city of Cedar Rapids. And while I worked with those stakeholders there, and my other colleagues worked in other cities, we had an opportunity to work with FEMA and talk with them about ways, as communities were recovering from that, how they can get some of the funding and dollars that they provide to flood mitigation, how the planning process and a lot of the discussions that we have, like this discussion today, how can that be embedded more specifically into that recovery effort? So that was sort of our lesson learned there, and I specifically didn't have any slides to show from that experience, mostly because it was very policy driven. We met, we learned things. There were lots of ideas that kind of went into how we would be better informed. And so from that, if you flash forward maybe about 4 or 5 years, I'll talk more specifically about this project that we had in Vermont, which was this development of a flood resilience checklist. And at your table, there's 2 handouts there. One, which is a Word document that relates to this checklist, and then the other document is a list of publications, so that you have an idea of, beyond just this work on flood resiliency, there's a variety of different ideas, best practices, tools that cover a wide range of planning issues that I think are important for us to think about, and I wanted to let you know kind of what we've been able to develop. So with that, we work with a variety of communities through a technical assistance process. In this case, it was Vermont, in the wake of Tropical Storm Irene a few years ago. And what we tried to do was think about their community and how they can adapt to adapt to the flooding that occurred there. And so what we thought was flood resilience in Vermont in 2011 thinking about ways of the flooding, of the erosion that took place, the state asked for this assistance in coming up with identifying what kind of planning and what kind of smart growth strategies could they put in place or could they be thinking about so that this, cities along the river here, that they can think about so that they can, whether it's figuring out ways so that the river doesn't flood particular areas or thinking about ways to divert stormwater. We talked specifically about that, but one of the main characteristics of this whole process is, and I'll read this so everyone knows kind of where we were grounded at, where and how we build or rebuild our communities will affect our ability to withstand disasters in the future. So I'm not here to kind of go real specific into the process of Ellicott City and what was done in the past, because we all know that downtown is flooded, or Main Street is flooded before. We're hopeful that it won't flood again. But there are specific ways that how land uses are, and we know that it's a pretty compact area in that floodplain. There are ways through what we've learned in Vermont that we can hopefully provide ideas about what to do here and also, around the country. So again, we worked with our partners at FEMA. We work with state agencies. We work with the Mad River Valley Planning District and the Regional Plan Commission in the same way that we're working here. So it was meant to be a collaborative process to get this discussion going. Again, similar to how we're doing here. We had national experts come in. We talked about the river. We refined options for this, and I'm kind of going through the sort of setup pretty quickly to get to what we wanted to talk about. And here in Vermont, we established things that it wasn't a one-size-fits-all. Just thinking about here in Ellicott City, the most affected businesses, there's that part of the affected area, but there's also other parts along the Patapsco River, the Tiber Creek, and so on, that we can see in Vermont. There were different strategies for the whole watershed. There were strategies for river corridors, strategies for new planned areas, like, for instance, what different can be done for new development up here, above the downtown or the Main Street, and vulnerable settlements like along Main Street. So there were ways, thinking about those things, about comprehensive planning, hazard mitigation, building codes, development regulations, stormwater management, all these things that you're probably at least somewhat familiar with, I would guess. But thinking about those strategies are ways to think about it. So we talked about protecting and conserving undeveloped land. I mean, there's a lot of, as we know, kind of compact land right here up to Main Street in this viewshed. But there are ways to transfer development rights so that other land that's kind of a little bit further out that might be on the blocks for development, we can see of ways that potentially reserving some of that land, because as we found, there have been ways that additional development can put pressure on the watershed. Beyond that, there were ideas about some of the safer areas, the plan for new development, about upgrading building codes, consider relocation. These are just ideas of what was being considered in Vermont. Designating new growth areas, encouraging compact walkable, which we certainly have here in Main Street, but all ideas about also the whole watershed. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the green infrastructure practices that were put in place there that could help, sort of catch some of the stormwater. So what we did specifically with that, and with some of the things that we learned there, was create this resilience checklist, so that as the state of Vermont and some of their communities thought about how they were going to address their disaster recovery plans, thinking about hazard mitigation, thinking about whether or not these things applied to them, we thought about how that checklist could get developed, and thinking about insurance, as I know most property owners here already have gone through that process of thinking of that. But what I wanted to do is just kind of give that quick perspective. There's a link there to where the full report is about some of that experience, some of the discussion that we had. And then from that, as we developed that checklist, there were 5 other communities: Mobile, Alabama; Newburyport, Massachusetts; New Paltz, New York; St. Etienne's in California, and Scituate, Massachusetts. Each of those places had received technical assistance under the guise of this checklist that we had developed. And from that, those projects had started in 2015, and we'll see some of the results of that probably by next year or at some point next year. And one of the things to caution with that is, as our technical assistance, as I mentioned with the experience in Cedar Rapids and with the flooding of the Cedar River, is that it's a slow incremental process. As we thought about ways that change was happening, we'd found that changing development regulations, it takes time to go through that process. It takes time to see, some of that development that exists. And then finally, I just want to touch on, a couple aspects of green infrastructure that were part of this bigger picture of tools and resources that the EPA works on. Specifically, we worked or identified the city of Newark, New Jersey, and a park that they had provided, or a park that they redeveloped that opened it up to the Hudson and keeping ways of providing that diversity there, as well as Joplin, Missouri, who, while not flooding, but their disaster was more tornado, but the street itself, as they thought of redeveloping, coming up ways, with some ways of a complete street or a greener street that had some vegetation on the right-of-ways to help bring in some of that, to manage some of that stormwater. And then 2 other documents that we've developed, and unfortunately we haven't printed copies of these because everything's online these days. There's 2 documents that I want to call out. One, which is City Green, Innovative Green Infrastructure Solutions for Downtowns and Infill Locations, and then Enhancing Sustainable Communities with Green Infrastructure. There's a lot of information there in terms of, dealing with stormwater management, creating some retention areas under streets and sidewalks, finding ways that whether it's engineered or whether it's, like I said, vegetation as a way to capture some of that water, which I know might be a little constrained here on Main Street, but I think there are some creative ways in looking at that first document. The City Green had there's about a dozen case studies there, which are fairly new. So, there's a good deal of best practice that we know, but thinking about a year out, 2 years out, 5 years out, we want to see kind of how those things are maintained and produced. So with that, those are the main things. Going back, kind of coming full circle to our work in Iowa, a lot of that, like I said, was about policy development, and specifically with that, the Iowa Smart Planning Act was enacted from the work that we did with FEMA and with this Iowa Smart Planning Task Force. So to thinking about, as they redevelop, what are some of the things that they can prioritize? And I just mentioned that our EPA's Office of Water that we collaborate a lot with, they work specifically with the state of Maryland, and that's why I wanted to focus this here. And while this is the initial version of it is a little old, the 2000 Maryland Stormwater Design Manual, it still has application, which I think can be applied here today. So I'm not here to say that this is what we should put in place, because I think some of this stuff already is being put in place, is being considered. Not my place to provide that perspective, but I think some of the local planners here, I'm sure, are consulting with the state Department of the Environment. So with that, the full report and the flood resilience checklist is online. when I agreed to do this presentation, or at least offered to do it, I was with the EPA, and I've recently moved over to a different agency, still in the federal government. But Stephanie Bertania, my colleague at the Office of Sustainable Communities, she was on the ground in Vermont, had worked with the communities there to develop that checklist. And so her number is there, that if you want to talk with her specifically about the work there in Vermont, you know, she's that person. If you want to talk to me about, you know, bigger picture stuff with regard to a lot of the technical assistance that we provided, I'd be happy to share, you know, further information as well. So with that, I'll pass things back over and be happy to answer any questions or...
So first, thank you, Kevin, for that presentation. So we do have time for Q&A, and we have a couple of our people that are going to be moving around the room with microphones. So I'm sure Kevin's slides generated a number of questions for you. So if you can just raise your hand if you have one. Kevin's here for the next 10 or 15 minutes, if we need him for that long, to answer any questions you have about the slides or anything else in his program. So,
yes, sir.
So let's make sure we get a microphone over, and we're gonna, when the microphone comes over, we'd like to ask you to stand. It'll be easier. And make sure you speak into the microphone.
Yeah, can you offer any specific examples of things they did in those communities that would apply to our Ellicott City?
Yeah, I mean,
situation?
one of the things, as I was thinking about, you know, specific things like here in this typology of a community, I mean, I meant to really, in 15 minutes, it was hard to like drill down into too many things. And that's why I kind of try to keep it somewhat broad, and that some of those documents have, you know, there's 12 examples in one of the green infrastructure documents where I think you can kind of pick and choose some of the things, like where we really found a lot of benefit. You know, I can see, just kind of going back, and I'm sorry that I kind of crammed a lot into this, but the example here is, the example here, this is from Norman, Illinois. So this is a roundabout that's in the downtown, which obviously isn't quite the same thing as exactly what we have here. But the idea, and this is why I wanted to include it, was, you know, before they put in this roundabout, it was completely, you know, impervious, just kind of you know, a street thoroughfare. And what they realized was that area was flooding quite a bit in that area of downtown, and they thought that they can address a few things. One, they had some traffic issues, you know, lots of people coming from various directions, and they wanted to address that flow of traffic. But they also realized with the flooding that was occurring, because it was kind of a low-lying area, that with, you know, creating this green space and a traffic or a roundabout, there was opportunities for, you know, some of the vegetation that was here, and then having, you know, kind of a stormwater capture underneath that, as you know, as water was being filtered into the vegetation, it was, some of it was being treated, and then, you know, what wasn't being infiltrated or, you know, absorbing into this vegetation was then, you know, captured as normally would be in, you know, like any kind of stormwater drainage system. But I can't remember off the top of my head the percentage that they reduced, you know, the flow of water there. But something like that, I tried to think about, you know, specifically with the amount of impervious surface that's downtown. You know, I think there are ways, like, again, I'm not here to say, hey, let's pull out all the sidewalks, or, you know, one idea I think I did read, just sort of as a for example, might be getting rid of all the street parking and putting in, you know, bioswales, or, you know, some sort of vegetated land strip there that could then capture some of that stormwater and filter it, you know, on site. Because that's, in a way, that's really the point of a lot of this kind of stormwater management, is that, you know, no matter where the source of the stormwater is coming from, if there are ways to manage that on site more than just catching it in a basin, holding it, and then releasing it, because I know that there's a lot of different ways that the town was in the situation that it was, but obviously the amount of surge there was with stormwater, the failure of a basin to collect that and keep it, there's in a way it's unfortunate how much impervious surface there is, but with having the creek there, you would think that from a natural standpoint, should be able to accommodate some of that. But from a green infrastructure standpoint, there probably are ways to include, some natural vegetation to collect some of that water in, non-thousand-year floods.
I want to make sure we get to some more questions. So
Sorry.
I know we had one down here, and then we'll go over to
Here
the
in the
back
back.
table. See, right here in the front. And if you could stand again.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. The presentation as well as the checklist provide a lot of good information, and the checklist especially refers a lot to communities doing this. But
Right.
could you speak more to there are a number of things, especially in the checklist, that would be led by a local government, the county government, perhaps maybe some involvement from the state government, I'm not sure. So could
Right.
you speak to how an effort around applying this checklist could be organized, with participation of the community, with the county government? What should that organization look like?
Right. Yeah, and I think that gets back to, some of the description in terms of how, whether it was like the way that we organized the work in Iowa, where we at the federal level decided to go in and work with their local smart growth office, but then also bring in, another federal partner in FEMA. We thought that, yes, we could address some of the very localized issues, but kind of stepping up back from that, there are either regional or state or even national level levers or policies that could be changed, and that's why admittedly. In Iowa, we did focus specifically on development regulations, and we had to crosswalk, what was happening at the local level with what was being allowed, in the region, what was being allowed sort of statewide. So having that multi-tiered, group of stakeholders part of that discussion, and again, the way that I understood these series of discussions were, this is kind of a, engagement with community, kind of a listening to, what folks here in the room, what you're feeling about some of this. And I think eventually we will get to, having those coalitions built together to have a more comprehensive way of addressing these issues. So, I can tell you what happened there, and even with that coalition, we were able to come up with kind of that state level policy, as I mentioned with the smart growth state policies. However, as I also mentioned, things take time, and we can't expect, even with the best policies in place, for there to be wholesale change, right away. I mean, there was additional flooding of the Cedar River just, I think, earlier this summer in August. And while some of the policies we put in place had helped, kind of tamp that down, there's a lot of work to be done. And I'm confident in the way that, local officials here in Howard County have identified, let's have some discussion about this, but then also the work that they're trying to do to think about what's best. I'm hopeful in my discussions in being here that they have that sort of process in mind.
So in the back, just one thing that I didn't say is that Kevin's presentation will be put up on the EC Strong Recovery website probably within the next week, so people will have the full slide set available to take a look at and click on links and so on and so forth.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm Marty Boyd. This is going to be a little different. And I'm really here because I did have a question, and I'm hoping that maybe somebody else witnessed what I witnessed. Okay? Prior to this event that you were calling a flood, it was really like Niagara Falls fell on Ellicott City. In fact, I had some people come by who were new. They're saying, what happened? Where did the water come from? And they were wanting me to point up the street and say it came from there, it came from there. I said, it came out of the sky. He says, well, that's a jerk answer. But I said, it did come out of the sky. Prior to the event, I was on Route 1 going south at 175. And I had to stop at the light there, and everybody knows that area if you know Jessup. I was sitting at the light, and I'm looking up for a moment because I was stopped. And I looked up at the sky, and what I saw was very unusual. It was a series of stripes. Now, I know we know about chemtrails and the crisscrossings, and people see that in the sky. And I'm not an expert on chemtrails. I've done a little bit of research, but I really am not an expert. But when I saw these, they were in parallel lines, like a farm, like seeding a row of something in the sky. And there was so many of them, I counted more than 20. I thought that was really kind of weird. And I thought, has anybody else, is anybody making any connection to what was being seeded in the sky? This was not right before the event, but in fact, I wish I had made a note of the day and written it down, because if I had made that connection, I just can't remember. But it was prior to the flooding or the rainstorm and the Niagara Falls coming on us. And then there was another episode a month later over towards Anne Arundel, towards Arundel Mills over that way, where the sky just opened up, very unusual. This is not a normal heavy rainfall. This is like weird falling. So I wonder, had anybody else seen this in the sky? Is it related? Were they seeding something in our atmosphere? I don't know. That's why I'm hoping maybe somebody here from the EPA might have an answer to that question and to help me. And if it's not related, then I'll feel great. It's unrelated, it didn't mean anything. But it is very suspicious to me that there were that many rows, like it was farmed. Something was seeded into the sky. What was it? And why did they do it like that? That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak to the fact that I think what you saw, probably other people did see, and the the impact of that, which is what we know, that amount, what was, I think it was what, 6 inches per,
in 2.5 hours.
Yeah, in 2.5 hours. That, I mean, as we've, worked in communities around the country, so, I mean, I'll speak to the fact of the growing, occurrence of storm events like that. I mean, I can't explain, what you saw, but we do know that, over the course of time, the time that I've been in the office that I've been in, we're seeing these types of events, and whether it's the amount of volume of rain, that's coming in the storms, as well as thinking about the land use decisions that kind of set the table for the type of impact that occurs. We have to think about how to rebuild in such a way that
That's not what it's down for. You might as well put on a wetsuit.
Yeah.
Because you can't not the planning is like you're going to plan us to be in some kind of a big cement swimming pool.
Right.
You have to think that this is an odd thing. Wherever the money garden and management, water management is a wonderful way to go. I mean, everybody knows about planting a rain garden, and that's a great thing. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't.
Right.
I'm just saying, this was something, how do you fight something like that? Where if they are putting something in the sky that we don't know about, how do you find out if they are doing that?
So, I mean, just very quickly, the only thing that I know is that I know that Howard County interviewed the National Weather Service, and they were tracking that storm in the hours before it happened and while it was happening, and they do have, I think, some fairly clear explanations of that event.
I'm talking about the Deputy Director of Emergency Management for Howard County. I'm Tom McNeil. I'm the Deputy Director of Emergency Management for Howard County. It was what's called a back-building thunderstorm. It's a natural phenomenon. It's an unusual phenomenon, but it is a natural phenomenon. Not very unlike what happened in Columbia, South Carolina, but they got 12 inches in like 24 hours. It's a real event. There was nothing nefarious or conspiracy-wise behind it. It's a real natural event. It's unusual, which is why they categorize it as like a 1,000-year storm. It's not supposed to happen very often, but it is a truly natural event.
All right, we only have, what I'd ask is if you want to continue the conversation, I think the gentleman who just answered would be happy to answer those questions, but I want to take a few more here.
So when you did the work in Vermont and in Iowa, did you find that you found a series of, like a list of small mitigation projects that actually had a large impact to the area?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we specifically found was the development regulations that were in place, specifically in Iowa. I'll talk there first. That there were lots of different ways that you could change zoning codes. You could change, regulations about where development could go. You could change ways about about the transportation network, and many of those changes, because like I said, the Cedar River flooded in 2009, and it flooded, again, just this past August. And so for what I knew in terms of it wasn't exactly the same event, but many of the policies that they put in place that focus development, in certain areas, or shielded development from other places, did reduce the propensity for additional flooding to exist in places that we thought were going to flood again. Meaning, the theories that my office has had for many years in terms of, if you have compact development, in certain, in many cases, if that saves development out on the fringe, that's gonna be better than a much more uniform development throughout. There was that with regard to Vermont. The mitigating things that they put in place, I'd have to honestly go back and look at the report in specific detail. I mean, I intended to kind of pack a lot in so that there were links that if there were things people were particularly interested in, they could kind of look through that.
So let me see if we can take at least one more. Let's right here in the back corner table. Is there anyone else? Right here. Okay, so we'll take two more.
Hi, I live in the Dunlogan community, which is a stone's throw from here, and is on the western side of the Tiber-Hudson watershed.
I've been through there. Yep.
So I was looking at the checklist, and it talks about new development, and kind of what you were just talking about. It says that compact, walkable areas are seemingly better, but like in our neighborhood, to me, that says density, and density seems to be causing some of the problems. So can you reconcile the good idea of having compact, walkable communities not causing a density watershed problem?
Right. Well, I mean, unfortunately, the real critical issue here is having all this density in the most critical place within the watershed. I mean, as we all know, like Main Street is in probably the absolute worst location for the impacts that we see, right? So you can, I definitely certainly understand the question. I'm saying on one side, compact development actually helps, but if you have compact development, in the absolute worst place of the watershed where everything is converging, naturally, you're going to have problems. And so that's why I think some of the solutions, because I know, I could use this as a for instance. There, going back to the Iowa examples, there were 5 cities that I said that had flooded, and one of the cities was just a town of 300 people. But again, it was in the most severe part or most susceptible part of the watershed there, and the U.S. representative of that area was dead set on doing everything he possibly could to rebuild exactly where it was. So what happens over and over and over? Granted, I mean, it was just, it was a town of 300 people, and there are places that, because you have a lot invested, and similarly here, we want to see all the businesses thrive. We want to see the businesses, come back and grow. And so there's a lot of competing interests there. But I think the realism of it is, unfortunately, there was good reason to have Main Street where it is back when it was, first developed, for, the access to the river, access to, the Frederick Road, getting down into Baltimore. So I mean, it made sense, but that's kind of what we get with having that compact development there. And so some of the mitigating features here, some things that we can think about are, the land development, kind of where you're talking about further up. There has to be other ways to divert some of the water so it's not all just rolling down Frederick, as well as once stormwater is there, how to manage or how to filter that water, whether it's, creating some basins, maybe, I don't know what's underneath one of the parking, like where La Palapa is, like back there, that parking, the parking lot back there, was that Lot D? I forget. But anyway, I don't know if there's a cistern, like an enormous cistern under there, but that certainly would be my first thought of, diverting floodwater there in that parking lot and treating water there. So it wasn't completely flowing.
I think one thing to
downtown.
emphasize here is,
I mean, I'm not. Yeah.
I mean, there are a number of studies happening right now to try and figure, and
I'm just throwing out ideas. I'm not the expert
within a couple
here.
months, we'll have a better idea of exactly what happened and where we need to focus, where we don't need to focus. And right now we're just, I think, sharing ideas. Why don't we take one last quick question, quick response, and then I want to get to the table discussions.
I live on Main Street, and I don't know if anyone in the room remembers, a few years ago we had a grant, and it was for the greening of Main Street, and we had consultants come in, and they had a plan that we needed more green to take away parking spaces. It was several meetings, and they had wonderful ideas. They had drawn up wonderful plans.
Right.
Speed bumps going up Main Street, brick with drains underneath of them, taking away a lane in Old Columbia Pike and putting green there, taking away spaces in the middle of the road, putting green there to form what we need to absorb water.
Right.
And I don't know what happened to that plan. Instead, we ended up with the courthouse staircase that I call the Stairway to Heaven, and that flooded my house in the back. I mean, instead of putting more green down, we put more concrete down.
So is your question, what happened to that
What
plan?
happened to that plan?
Yeah, so do we have any folks from Howard County that can quickly answer? Do we know what plan is being referenced? And
As we're sorting that out, I'll offer, just kind of going back to this question about the stakeholders. I mean, the Department of Transportation, I'm sure, has something to do with it. This, Main Street being a state road, and
so, I'm sorry, do we have anyone from Howard County?
No, I think they're looking for it.
Okay.
yeah.
All right, so tell you what, with that question, I'll try to get an answer for you by the end of the evening. So can we please, again, thank Kevin for his presentation and his, thank you very much. All right. All right, so a great transition. So we will look to get an answer for you before the evening is out. The next task is at the table where we're going to ask you to think about Kevin's presentation, perhaps again looking at the handouts that he has on the table, thinking about some of the Q&A responses that you just heard, and asking each table to come up with 2 or 3 ideas that you found most compelling and also most applicable to the long-term recovery process for Ellicott City. So have a conversation. You may generate 6 or 8 or 10 ideas, but try and pick just 3 that you're going to submit into us at the end of your discussion. You're going to have about 20 or so minutes for this conversation. So the theme team is going around again and collecting your Post-it notes. If I can have everyone's attention back up front. Shh, 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 shh. All right. So we're going to move into the next part of the program. The theme team is beginning to look at all those Post-it notes. They will synthesize them. I want to bring Phil Nichols, right? Phil Nichols from the County Executive's Office. Yes, he can get a round of applause. And there was a question about an earlier study from a few years ago. We didn't have the answer immediately. Phil is going to quickly speak to it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I see the lady who asked must have just stepped out, so I'll grab her afterwards. But just to hit on that question that was asked. So yes, about 3 years ago, a consultant was brought in, and they did about 5 renderings. So these weren't like very hardcore designs, engineering, but they were just beautification enhancements. And so that was brought in and conducted in another administration, so I can't speak to where those were. But as we move forward, we look at the master planning process as being, scientifically driven. That includes kind of those beautifications and, your ideas as part of the community, and that's why we're here tonight. And so I don't want to delay it any further, but I just wanted to make sure that we got to that, and I'll pull her aside when I see her. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. And so next I'm going to bring up Joe Herr, who I know many of you know, the recovery manager. And he's going to talk a bit about, give you an update on some of the construction projects that have been going on, and talk a little bit about the process that we've been going in terms of compiling project ideas from around the community that we will continue here tonight. Welcome to Joe Herr.
Thanks, Steve. So over the past few months, there's been a lot of construction going on Main Street, so I'm just going to give you a quick overview on that and work through it with the slides here. So this is some of the channel wall being rebuilt by Lot E, where it comes down and took out the channel wall before it turns there at the brewery. That's on the my right, your left. This one on the other side is construction work where they had to rebuild the wall at the channel where it failed early on. This is a long time ago. It doesn't look like that now, thank goodness. This is under the railroad bridge coming into the county where all the debris had to be removed after the flood. It's all cleaned up now, and there's still some sidewalk work that needs to be done crossing the bridge into Baltimore County. The picture here on the left is the rebuilding of the roadway and the retaining channel wall at Hamilton Street. That was about a 6-week project. You can see how they put the tiebacks back into the ground to hold the wall up. That wall failed, and a lot of debris went down into the river right there. The channel walls on the other side there have been rebuilt just in the past couple weeks, and the debris has been cleared out of the stream. This is rebuilding the roadway, looking south on Main Street, going down towards Old Columbia Pike. If you remember, you can see all the asphalt, all that was tore up all the way into the foundations, and the foundations were about ready to fail, and we thought some of the buildings were going to have to come down in that area. Over here, they're building the new EC Strong crosswalk that crosses between the brewery over towards Lapa Lapa parking lot. That was never there before. Had been trying to get it put in, and they said we're going to put it in now because they had to redesign the driveways because they were all destroyed. Here's where they built the crosswalk and the driveway coming into Lapa Lapa's parking lot. All that area was completely destroyed from the flood coming out of the riverbanks and across the Main Street. Over here is a picture of where all the sandbags were trying to hold up the ground so that the house didn't collapse and some other things, and that's there by the brewery. In an earlier slide, you can see where they were framing for the concrete work. Here is BG&E replaced all the gas lines up Main Street up to about Lapa Lapa's area. And this is when their work began. So it's all new gas lines have been installed, new lateral cuts, and everybody had to get new gas meters, which was a little bit problematic for some people. But as far as I know, the majority of the BG&E work is over with, and they're putting in more permanent pavement, and people have gotten back up and running. So this is how we started generating project ideas. So if you look, we had different groups. We had design engineers come in, economic recovery people, flood working group, our community advisory group, and the historic preservation people came in and gave us project ideas. And then we used the senior staff from the county, people that are really close to this kind of work, and they gave us ideas. So all those funneled in. We had a community meeting where we got ideas. We're going to get some more tonight. The meeting on December the 1st, that's what I thought. And then meeting on December the 10th. The ideas are going to be assessed as like long-term ideas that fall into the long-term planning process, or things that we can do now, kind of the low-hanging fruit, and start to pick off those projects. So you can see we can implement some of those ideas. The long-term planning ideas are going to have to be mixed in with the flood study, the master planning in the spring, and then the plan implementation that could take a protracted years to, completely do for the master plan for the drainage area. So as we get ideas, we look at them and say, is this feasible? Is it fundable? And they're prioritized to say, what's going to have the most benefit to build a resilient community as we move forward. This is the website that's now up, ecfloodrecovery.org. It's up and running, so feel free to go there. We'd like to get people used to going there to find the most up-to-date information. It just went live this afternoon, so please take a look at it. And we captured earlier 250 ideas. So rather than just like throw idea after idea up, we looked at what the themes were. And tonight we're talking about rebuilding. So there's all the infrastructure things, and then what we got for ideas for rebuilding in the environment. So this is kind of where we're headed, to try and keep putting things into buckets and see what comes out and what the best ideas are, and then see what we can push forward sooner rather than later, and then things that are going to fall into the master plan. So I think that's about the end of my discussion, and I was limited to 7 minutes, and I think I made it.
And you did make it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. So as Joe said, there were 250 ideas, and they fell into 5 categories. We're going to focus on the first 2 categories that you saw up there, rebuilding and the environment, just so that we all are kind of working off the same definition for rebuilding an environment. So I don't know if anyone has seen the document that has the 6 pillars for recovery, but it's healing, stability, preservation, rebuilding, environment, and the economy. The definition for tonight's meeting for rebuilding an environment. Rebuilding is rebuild historic Ellicott City with an emphasis on resilient infrastructure through flood mitigation. So you saw, I think, about a dozen different themes that have come through so far. For the environment, it's to pursue and implement projects that ensure the continued vitality of our natural resources in pursuit of a sustainable quality of life. So those are the definitions that we used when we were moving different project ideas that have been generated so far into the different categories. So our task for the next 15 or so minutes is, so you should have a handout, or your table facilitator can distribute it at the table, that shares the themes that have emerged so far out of those 250 ideas for the rebuilding pillar and for the environment pillar. And so we're wanting you to take a look at the themes that have emerged so far from those 250 ideas for rebuilding and for environment, and have a short conversation at the table of how, when you think about what the kinds of things that need to be done around rebuilding and infrastructure, do these themes kind of capture well the kinds of things that you think need to be done? Same thing with environment. Do the themes that you see that have emerged so far capture pretty well what we need to do from an environment standpoint for the long-term recovery process? So review those for a minute at the table before you enter into that discussion. Then talk kind of high level, how well do those themes capture where we need to go? And then think about, are there any critical themes missing in the rebuilding section of themes or the environment section of themes? When you're thinking about the kinds of things that need to be happening in each of those pillars. So I'm going to just give you 60 seconds right now to just look at those themes that have come up so far. So each time you see a theme, it probably represents 5 or 8 or 12 ideas that were kind of in that category. Take that minute, look at it, have a short discussion about how well do these capture, and then your output from this conversation is, are there critical themes missing? Is it 1? Is it 2? Write each one down on a separate Post-it note. At the end of this conversation, the theme team will collect it. So we're going to give you about 15 to 17 minutes to do this whole task, and then at the very end, I'm going to have you guys actually propose specific project ideas. But for right now, you're just looking at the themes at the table and telling us how well we have captured things, and are there themes missing? So go to it. Thank you. Conversation again. Thank you very much. I know we've generated a lot of ideas here. So right now I'm going to ask everyone to pull out, it says Recovery Project Idea Template. If you don't have it yet, your table facilitator should have copies. This is at an individual level, thinking about something that you're really passionate about, that you want to make sure gets considered during the long-term recovery process. You may want to link it to the kind of the thematic ideas you were talking about at the table. Is there a specific project of a critical theme that was missing that you think really embodies what you were talking about? And so we're asking you to take about 3 or 4 minutes right now, give that idea a title, decide which category you think it belongs in, a short description so that someone who's not you knows what you meant when you said X, Y, and Z. The impact you think that project should have, so it's really thinking about, if we did this, what would the result be? The area affected, and the overall cost. And these are just kind of Try and do it quickly, roughly. There's also a way to do this online afterwards on the new website. But take 3 or 4 minutes. If there's a project you're really passionate about, fill it out on the sheet and we'll collect them at the end of the night. Do a few more things here if I can get everyone's attention. So first, we're going to get a chance to hear back from the theme team that looked at all of the ideas from both conversations you had. And what we asked them to do was they gathered 30 to 40 ideas each time. What we asked them to look for were the ideas that were recurring. So they've collected all of the ideas. There were a lot of unique ideas. So what you're going to see here are the recurring ideas from each conversation. So when we asked you to have the conversation about what's applicable from the presentation that Kevin gave, there were 5 themes, recurring themes: stormwater management through stricter regulations, green infrastructure retention, etc., better upstream and upland water management, utilize multi-tier approach involving all levels of government, have Howard County complete the EPA flood checklist, and stricter policies on future development that lessens negative impacts. So those were the recurring ideas we saw across all of them, all of the post-it notes. So that was the first conversation. The conversation you just had, they collected them and they saw 5 ideas that were recurring about what seemed to be missing from the rebuilding ideas and the environment ideas. So a review of the impact of Main Street and the sidewalk, including repairing, rebuilding where the water is going, access to the river as an amenity and marked with plaques, maximizing outdoor seating, small tree planting to break up asphalt, make river buffers wider. So again, we collected, those aren't all the ideas, those are the ones that were recurring, but we've collected them. We will compile them all and move them into the mix. And by now, you should have finished your templates and handed them to the table facilitators, and we will make sure over the next week or so that all that gets up to the website. Quick question?
So do those themes that aren't here, do they go to Joe and the EC Recovery?
Yeah, so those also will be added to the website as well. Okay? So thank you for doing that hard work tonight, that analysis. The team that was over here said, yeah, they're right. These are definitely things that are missing. So you did your job well. All right. So now, before we close out, we're going to ask you 2 quick polling questions. So grab your polling keypad again. This is a press all that apply. Who do you think has responsibility for reducing flood risk for Ellicott City? Press all that apply. 1 federal, 2 state, 3 county, 4 the people in the area affected, 5 other. And for your listening pleasure.
Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly.
All right, anyone need more time? Okay. So very high percentage you think for sure Howard County, obviously already involved, state of Maryland, the people in the area affected, about 2/3 of you federal government, another 30% other. What were some examples of other?
Howard County citizens in general.
Howard County citizens in general, other nonprofits, businesses. Great. Okay, second and final poll. So this is just, obviously there are so many elements of recovery, and part of it is also what we as individuals can do so we don't feel powerless. These may be things that you're already doing, things you're planning to do, or things you haven't thought of. But what are the things I'm ready to commit to doing to help the environment and the rebuilding process? Again, Press all that apply. Does anyone need me to read these 7, or is it large enough that you can read them all? You're okay? All right. Press all that apply. All right, who can name that band? Who can name the band? Bachman Turner Overdrive. All right, 1970 something, right, Mark? All right, anyone need more time? I like that we got some rock and roll finally in here. All right. So we have 2 and 4 are the highest vote getters. About 80% of you landscape my property to accommodate stormwater, stay involved in the master plan process. That's great. We're going to be doing that throughout 2017. Another 2/3 of you volunteer my time to clean up streams, storm drains, and to install rain barrels at my home or my business. And half of you to donate to organizations working to rebuild Ellicott City. So that's great to hear how involved you're ready to be. And hopefully many of your neighbors who are not here tonight are willing to do many of the same things. All right, so before we close, I want to bring a few people up here to share some things that you need to know about that are going on. So first I'm going to ask Monica Fabry, who's secretary of the Ellicott City Long-Term Recovery Committee. Yes, you can give her a round of applause.
Okay, I get to be the previews of coming attractions, and I'll be brief because my committee is not completely set up yet. We do hope to go live in a couple of weeks, but I thought I would tell you a little bit about it. I'm going to read the mission statement, and then I'll explain what goes after that. The Ellicott City Long-Term Recovery Committee exists to assist the recovery of those affected by the flooding on July 30th, with special focus on the Main Street Ellicott City community. And as I read that, I said, well, that's what we're all here for. So what's different about this committee? When you had the incident, you've got county, you've got state, Red Cross, volunteer groups, nonprofits, volunteers. Everybody rushes in to manage the crisis. And that takes a lot of adrenaline, it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of effort in a short amount of time. The trouble is that won't be the end of it. And sometimes you have groups who have come in to help with the crisis, but they aren't really set up to be a long-term management organization. And that's where the Long-Term Recovery Committee comes in. We're a mostly volunteer group, chosen or picked, people volunteer from nonprofits, local churches, volunteer groups, people who were involved in the flood in the beginning, set up a committee. We are actually waiting on nonprofit status. We've incorporated, and what we're going to do is be a gap filler. Our job is to come in and work alongside the county recovery, but to try to fill in the gaps. A lot of that is residential. We'll be hiring a construction manager and a case manager, and what we'll do is try to really go through thoroughly the residential area and then the commercial area and just make sure that nobody's been lost in the cracks, and that we can go through an assessment process to see what do you need, what has already happened, what can we do from here. We will be set up to solicit donations, to manage volunteer time, and to just basically go on a case-by-case basis to get this whole thing done. We're in it for the long haul, 1 to 3 years, whatever it takes. That's what we're going to do. The website is not live yet. It will hopefully go live next week. It's ellicottcityrecovery.org. There will be a link to that on the county website, and there will, in the future, I don't know at what point, but after the professional work has been done, the masonry, the plumbing, things like that have to happen, that we will help people accomplish on a case-by-case basis. After that, there will be opportunities for volunteers, for church groups, things like that. So keep an eye out. Thanks.
Great. And it's cityrecovery.org. Quick question.
At the moment, because our bank account has just been set up and we've just become incorporated, we don't have money in an account. But most of the money that's coming, I don't know if you've ever heard of National VOAD. It's a group that goes from disaster to disaster and sets up committees like ours, and we're getting mentoring from them. The Lutheran disaster response has already got a certain amount of money designated for us, then that will help us hire the 2 staff members that we need. Yeah, and then after that, we will basically kind of come in alongside the ECP and then start taking over the disaster funding and money collection, things like that. So part of our job really is to keep this thing alive so that people don't forget about it and say, really, they're still working in Ellicott City? That's part of our job. Keep it alive, keep it in the public's mind, keep making money, and go down the list till everybody's clear. So.
Great. Thank you, Monica. Next, I want to bring up Bill Withers, who's on the board of the Ellicott City Partnership. I asked him, for those who know the Bill Withers singer, whether he could sing Ain't No Sunshine When She's Gone. He said only on demand, so we'll see.
No. Now, since this is about public service, we won't do that. So, Ellicott City Partnership, I see various of our members out here tonight, continues to collect money. We're in the process right now of dispersing about $1.5 million in funds. We're going to continue collecting through the end of the calendar year, and money is still coming in. We're still happy to take donations, and whenever I'm in a group of people from Ellicott City, I feel like I should just thank people, because I'm sure everybody in here has done something with the hard work, with blood, sweat, tears, money, and everything else that people are doing to pull our town back together. I want to talk tonight real quickly about some more fun stuff. So there's another website that you can jot down, which is called EllicottCityHolidays.com. It has all of the upcoming stuff for the rest of the year. I saw all these people clicking saying they'd be willing to help clean up. And we couldn't figure out how to hack this to get your names. But this Sunday morning, parking lot F, 9 o'clock, we're gathering as many volunteers as we can, and we're going to attack the town again, do some weeding, do some gardening, do some trash pickup, doing just basic cleanup. If you need more information about that, you can grab me afterwards, but it's pretty easy information. Bring your gloves, bring your tools, bring yourself, and show up. The 17th of November is Girls' Night Out. So we're getting back to things that feel normal, which is very exciting. That starts at 6 o'clock at night. The 26th of November is Shop Small Saturday. There'll be a shuttle operating so that people can park in the remote lots and get down to town. 10 o'clock that morning, there's an official grand reopening of Main Street. So Executive Kittleman will be there with all the bells and whistles, and that'll be exciting. Midnight Madness is December 2nd. When I first moved to the area, that's the first thing people said to me, you have to go to Midnight Madness. It's back. It's December 2nd. There will also be a shuttle there. Tree lighting is at 6 p.m. and all the fun that happens after that. December 6th is Giving Tuesday. So, there's Black Friday and there's Small Business Saturday. Giving Tuesday is something that we will be promoting through our marketing to remind people that we're still here and that we're still collecting money. December 15th is another great excuse to come out. It's Shop Local and Shop Late. So again, if you have any left, we're still collecting money, and you can go to ecpartnership.org or to the EC Strong website. And for the fun stuff, it's EllicottCityHolidays.com. And I'll be around for anybody that has questions or anything you need. Yes?
I just thought to follow up on this, there's the Veterans Day Parade. Is this?
Oh, yes.
Do you have the details?
I don't. Come on up.
Okay. Hi, I'm Melissa, and basically some of the people who I know are helping to organize the parade, so I happen to have the details. So the parade will start at 11 a.m. At St. Peter's Church. This is Saturday. This coming Saturday, Veterans Day Parade. The parade will start at 11 a.m. at St. Peter's Church, go down on Rogers Avenue, down Main Street and left onto Ellicott Mills into Lot F. And there will be vendors and games and things in Lot F from about 9 a.m. till 3 p.m., but the parade is at 11 a.m. And it'll be going mostly through that west end part of Main Street between Rogers Avenue and Ellicott Mills. So come out and support the veterans and shop in Ellicott City afterwards.
Thank you very much. Lots of things, exciting things going on. Thank you, Bill. Finally, I want to bring up Julia Sayaskis. Did I say that right? Yes. She challenged me. She said, you know, people just call me Julia. It's like, no.
Hi, thank you everybody for coming tonight. I love hosting things like this and being part of it is really nice to hear the community support and everything come out. But they asked me to say a few things about just the recovery that Roger Carter played, kind of how we helped out. And I think it was around 9:30 that the Director of Recreation and Parks called me and said, keep the center open past the normal closing time. And so we cleared out the public at 10 o'clock, and at 10:01, or 10 o'clock and 1 second, we opened up to be a shelter. So we had 4 cats, a handful of businesses come in. We had, I know, bless those who did lose some lives. We had a few people who came in searching for certain people. We took notes at the front desk. We took a few donations. I know we weren't supposed to, some supplies, but it was tremendous seeing kind of what was coming in the front door and how we were able to actually finally kind of put that mark on as a community center versus just a swimming pool and a fitness room. So that was very exciting to be part of. And then we transitioned literally the next day. We didn't open as the community center, and we just stayed open as a shelter. And I think within 24 or 48 hours, we were back to normal business. And we housed part of the Emergency Operations Center, the ESF 14, which was a brand new team that started this during this flood. So they worked out of one of our offices and helped with volunteer management. So the things you're hearing right now from the people who spoke before me, that was help. They came in right in the door and helped us kind of organize ourselves as well. So we participated in that. A handful of staff here stopped everything they were doing, worked plenty of hours, and actually we left our post as community center directors and assistant directors and facility coordinators and literally hit the streets and helped kind of stand in a tent in Walmart for a couple days. And I was the water girl in Old Ellicott City. Some of you I might have yelled at and told you to drink some water or put some sunscreen on or wear face masks. So my job was to blow a whistle and get everybody to drink water. So it was fun. I'm sorry to say it was a good time to see the community kind of come together. But we also host cleanups, so back to kind of what we do here at Roger Carter. We have a swimming pool, we have a fitness room, we host cleanups. We don't go into the river. There's Patapsco Heritage for that, but we hit the streets, we pick up trash. We try to clean up the streets, the parking lots right before some of your big events in Ellicott City. So we try to participate as a community, and we do welcome volunteers. I know Bill went down a long list of events that probably you already forgot about, but if you visit our bulletin board, you'll see the cleanup for Saturday, or is it Saturday? Sunday. You'll see Girls Night Out flyers out there. So if you ever are wondering what's going on and can't figure out what website to go to, visit our lobby. There's information. And if you have something to share, bring it to us. And then the final thing is just, I really look forward to having you guys hopefully come out for 2 more meetings, I guess 2 more in December 1st and 10th. So make sure, come out here. But if you have any questions about the center or ways you can participate in the community, feel free to come find me, and I might have a handful of information or at least steer you in the right direction. So, but thank you again, everybody.
Thank you, Julia. And thank you for hosting us tonight. All right, just very quickly, and then we're done. As we heard, next big event coming, or one of the big events coming on the 26th, Small Business Saturday. The next 2 meetings we'll be doing in this process. On Thursday, the 1st of December, we'll be focusing on rebuilding and economic development. We'll have a speaker from the former mayor of Frederick, Maryland, is that right, former mayor? The Economic Development Director there will be speaking about what the process that Frederick went through to help us think again from an economic development standpoint what might be applicable for Ellicott City. Then on the 10th, we have a speaker from Annapolis to talk about historic preservation. What's her name? Great. So the focus will be on that final pillar, rebuilding and historic preservation. Again, hearing about another important case and what might be applicable here. That will be the last event that we'll do by the end of the year. All of this will feed into the master plan process, which will be, for this recovery process, will be kind of the main event over the course of 2017. And I know that at least 80% of you plan to stay involved for that particular set of activities. So that's really it for tonight. I thank you for hanging in here. I know we've gone longer than we expected to. I do want to say a special thanks to the table facilitators for facilitating the conversations. The theme team for quickly turning around the recurring ideas to let us know collectively what we talked about, and especially for all of you for coming out to this meeting and giving us your own individual ideas and expertise. Have a great night. We'll see you hopefully in December.